Welcome everyone to the March 20th meeting of the Climate and Sustainability Coordination Group. Tonight we're going to continue to go through the results of the phase one work that the subgroups have completed, and then we're going to discuss the parameters and format of phase two, the meat of the assignment. Sorry, Ezra, the core of the work, changing metaphors, which is the recommendations phase. So last week we had report outs from a couple of the groups. So let's go to the groups that haven't reported out yet. Who wants to start? Roger, you want to start?
Yeah, I forgot. Can I share my screen or no?
Yes, you can. You should be able to.
Okay.
You should see on the lower ribbon the green button.
Yeah,
Share screen.
okay. It's let me just sorry. Here we go. Okay, you should be seeing just the window with the survey in it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So last time we met, we had pretty much zero results. This was our this was, our sort of our primary piece of work we were doing, which was to collect survey data from PSB staff. We had a few people that would help with the pilot. So I don't know if you can see the number. We have 109 out of, maybe Stephen knows, about 630 educators. I don't mean full staff. That's kind of the number I saw somewhere.
That's not bad.
So, it might not be exactly valid and representative, but I actually feel like in quickly looking over results, it looks pretty good. I'm just going to quickly show you. I can't remember if you've seen the survey or not, but I'm not going to go through every question here. This is the version that, the sort of editing version. Let me just, oops, I'm on the wrong one. Let me just go to responses. Sorry. Loading.
Roger, I missed that. How many responded?
109.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know. I can make this bigger. I just don't know if you're gonna be able to see it very well. But it's my dog slamming the door. Okay. So you can see on this top one, that's by school. So, Brooklyn High is about 38% of respondents, but it's, relatively even across schools. Baker has 9, Pierce has 20. That's generally the range. Actually, Lawrence has 5, but and then by grade level, pre-K has 4. We're making a big push on pre-K, but kindergarten 14, first 17, second 18. That's pretty much the range until we get to 9th to 12th, which is 42 at Brookline High. But again, that's 4 grades. And I won't go through every single one of these questions, but we got some representation from across disciplines: ELA, ELE, math, performing arts, science, social studies, wellness, world language, visual arts, and then some people who are sort of like you could sort of self-define if those categories didn't fit you. Roland School, 77% of the respondents are mainstream classroom teachers. About 4.5% are learning center, and then there's some admin, etc., filling out the rest. I just want to highlight a couple of things. I won't really go through all the open response, which was sort of optional at various points. But depending on how you answered, it might have moved you to the next question or not. We kind of the first big question was, do you teach about or engage students in climate change, sustainability, or foundational learning for those concepts? Meaning, if you're in 2nd grade, you're probably not learning the phrase climate change, but there's foundational things. And 61% said yes. What's really important there is that, that creates opportunity for us to, have some sort of through lines if we're sort of all in common mission about this. At some point, people can kind of see that, all right, I'm, doing butterfly habitat, but I can see where that would, what's the trajectory 5, 6, 7 years ahead. So that's kind of good. At the same time, a little over a third of people do not identify as doing anything connected. And just, keeping in mind, this includes literature, math, etc. All right, there's a bunch of open responses there about sort of what you're doing, if you are doing that. About 55% of educators said that they engage students in gardening, outdoor learning, field trips, or experiential learning connected to climate, sustainability, or foundational. So about half, probably most of that is probably gardening. And then again, we have open responses where people identify that. But like one person wrote, I use the book, Where Does Garbage Go? And then they talk about recycling, etc. Extracurricular, this really was, the data is a little bit fuzzy here because we said, do you know of any clubs, extracurricular or caregiver teacher activities in your school? So people didn't necessarily self-report. So a lot of the yeses are overlapping. Like people, there may have been 7 people who said, yeah, I know about the Keep Club at Driscoll, for example. But, almost 70%, well, about 2/3 basically said they're aware of something. Professional development, I really liked this response. Is there curriculum you'd like to add or professional development or other support for developing learning experiences related to climate sustainability? And 2/3 said yes. Just about 2/3 said yes. A third said they want to hide in a hole. I'm just kidding. But really 2/3 said they are interested in pursuing that. Again, there's a lot of interesting. 60 people offered some sort of open response on that. So with some specific things, like this person, I would like to see the science coordinator do some of this work. When we add 3rd grade weather unit in the next few academic years, it'd be great if it had a climate change component. We are currently working on adding science units in the middle school grades, but it would be great to see them expand to upper elementary. On and on. So at some point, we'll make those more open. So that's, I'm expecting we're not going to get any more responses without any sort of added push. This didn't really go out until Thursday afternoon and evening. Office Teaching and Learning sent it out. I sent like a bunch of emails to some curriculum coordinators saying he could ask people to do this, which I think actually made some difference. So I don't think the union sent it out, but that's okay.
You might as well hold it open though. Just to,
yeah, I won't close it. There's actually, this wasn't part of our plan, but I realize I'm going to make it part of our plan. And that is that at the same time, I'm also doing, every 2 years, I've done a BHS student sustainability survey. So I'm just going to show that to you really quickly. There's, I think, let me just refresh.
Wait, you didn't come to the end of the data on this survey, did you?
What's that?
Did you come to the end of the data on the?
I did. Yeah.
Oh,
on
okay.
The staff one, that was everything.
Okay.
There's, the last question was, are you willing to talk about this more, the follow-up? So it looks like some people certainly are.
Okay.
I'm just going to do this one very quickly, but we have 400. This is about, it's not quite a fourth of the school. And again, just to show you sort of representation, current year in school. So it's not exactly, perfectly distributed. There's 16% of the respondents were 9th graders, 40% were 10th grade, and then 11 and 12 were somewhere in between there. There were some other sort of identifying questions we asked, but I'll just, highlight a couple of things. I mean, basically students are saying that they recognize climate change is happening. They, for the most part, think it's due to human choices and activity. How much do you think climate change will harm you personally? 53% said a moderate amount. A quarter said a great deal. When do you think of climate change will start to harm people in the United States? 68% said, 67% are being harmed now. We asked in the world, 81% said. This was questions about how much do you think race and class kind of figure into that. This is the part that I'll just highlight real fast. Which of the following statements comes closest to your view? In red, 53% said humans could reduce global warming, but it's unclear at this point whether they will. And then 35% said humans could reduce it, but they're not willing to change. So basically, about 88% have reasons to feel very hopeless based on that response. And then we asked them, connected to that, this will be the last point I'll make here. In the last month, how much have you thought about climate change before taking this survey? About half said yes sometimes, and 18% said yes on most days, and a little under 7% said every day. And then we asked, how have you had thoughts or feelings that negatively impact your mental health? 2/3 said no, but almost a third said yes sometimes, and 3.5% said yes on most days. And then we also asked how much does it get.
How does that compare, Roger, with the previous numbers that you had gathered?
I have to look back. I don't remember. It's probably not dramatically different, but it's certainly at least somewhat stable. And then there's more about, how much have you learned about climate change in your classes? How much do you want to learn? Do you think you should learn, etc. And then I added a few questions about composting this year.
Roger, that stuff seems really germane to
Yeah.
the work of this group, because I just like, if you're going to make recommendations about curriculum, understanding where the students are, as you do with these surveys, seems really critical to that. Like, I mean, it literally would help you think about whether to start with a resilience point of view, a climate adaptation point of view, or taking more of an action orientation. Like these seems like, if you're going to meet students where they're at, this is the kind of information you would start with, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love everything you just said and how you said it. And, I'm going to highlight some of that at the conversation, which I hope a lot of people come to on Tuesday. It's meant to be a school community conversation. And like one of the things I'll make a point of is saying that, I like to say empowerment is the antidote to despair. You don't have to just know about stuff. We have to give students opportunities to take action. And you could say that's always true in education, but with something that is really connected to mental health, that's
Yeah.
how could it not get worse? It seems quite pressing. And it's also like an incredible opportunity for us as a school to, at least at BHS, to kind of have some common mission. Like there's many things we can be concerned about, but this is something that we could all sort of hold together and be more intentional about. And I think it's like really, it gives students like a sense of hope. As soon as you give them, I mean, Eric and I are in this, club on Thursdays and Wednesdays, and students are busy, and they're purposeful. These are kids who are thinking about climate change, but they're smiling, they're having a great time, and they're feeling useful, and they are being useful. And that's, like one of the high points of my week. So Eric says yes. And I
Hey,
love
Roger, how many students responded to this survey?
455.
455 responded. Wow, that's good.
Yeah, it took a lot of pressing and pushing and, cajoling. So I would have liked it to have been a little bit stronger, but anyway, I think it's meaningful.
Yes.
Any questions for Roger? I have another question, Roger. Other than the survey, well, two questions. Other than the survey data, is there any other critical data points in the inventory? Like, I know when you were reporting in previously, you talked about interviews you had, and I know we had talked about other resources that might be developing curriculum outside of the schools that might be available to PSP. Are there any key resources that you just would want to make note of in the inventory report?
Not generated by us, you mean, but like.
Right, not
outside.
generated by the survey. Like,
Yeah.
any curriculum that's being used or that's being developed around Brookline, or that's available through an extracurricular or anywhere else that might
I
be
don't really have
Go
much
ahead.
ready access to anything necessarily happening in Brookline. It seems like, I mean, it's very hard for me as a high school teacher to kind of know what's going on in the elementaries. A little bit at Pierce since my daughter's there, but and maybe some other teachers I know. Mark Goldner does this incredible project in science and art. Does these beautiful things. Like there's a few things like that I know. I'm less sort of interested in like, I mean, people have shared some stuff and I haven't gone through it all. Less interested in kind of knowing about like specific things that people do. And I don't want to tell people, don't do that project, do this project or whatever. But you know, there's several other states, California, New Jersey in particular, that have, you know, K to 12 or pre-K to 12, you know, scope and sequence kind of stuff. You know, New Jersey's the only state that requires at least K to 12 climate education. And then California is just, you know, it's California. So there's a lot of interesting resources there. I can't say I know those intimately, but there's like interesting ways to sort of say, here are like domains of learning. I kind of feel like for Lauren and Min and I, to kind of go through all this and make recommendations, like it's a little, we can do some of that preliminarily, but I think it's like really a step later is to get a much bigger group to really begin to think, you know, through that stuff, if it seems like there's momentum and support for doing that. And it's going to take some time and support. But I do feel like, you know, in here, embedded in here is there's a will, there's a desire, and there's like incredible opportunity, because there's, you know, some teachers who are, well, every teacher is like making their own of some of the requirements and have these pet projects that are cool and interesting and experiential, especially in the elementary grades. And yes, it would be just nice to kind of think about how do we, you know, what's a scope that people can find some connection to. You know, can we say in PSB that we're going to create opportunities K to 12 for outdoor experiences at some point, with a connection somewhere to foundational practices around understanding, you know, climate. But like you said, the resilience, the mental health piece, the, you know, racial and class justice pieces, you know, that totally has to be in there. Especially if we're gonna, you know, if we're gonna do like climate specific stuff, that's depressing for a lot of people. So we need to offer like support for that. But if it's like doing exploration of habitat that's setting them up for climate change later, hopefully that's not so depressing, you know. But I do think like there is a mental health issue, is the last thing to say. And I think we really need to build that in on top of all the other mental health stuff we're doing. But, you know, our mental health social workers, psychologists, etc., I think need to be mindful of how this may be independently acting upon all the other forces that are, you know, conspiring against young people's mental health right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Dean.
jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to just mention, Roger, I'm very struck by you saying to us that really the high point of your whole week is the after school environmental club, right? I mean, that you're saying on a lot right there. And I would say Francesca with the Keep Club may have a similar kind of feeling. I'm thinking of the students in those clubs that are energized, as you said, happy, working together, solving problems, taking action. I just don't want to lose that thread. I mean, I believe every school, it's a policy thing, a policy recommendation, every school needs a stipended after school climate related program where kids take action. Because you're right, Roger, that's going to keep people going. That's going to help mental health. It's, you know, we're all in this together. That, to me, that's very, very important. And the fact that you said that about being your high point. Eric, is that one of your high points? Yes, I think you said it is.
Okay, so Roger, what more needs to be done, do you think, to close this phase and move into the recommendations phase for your group?
I mean, I think we have to sort of package this up a little bit. I don't, you know, highlight some of the pieces, some of the quotes, maybe. I admit I haven't taken a deep look at the template you sent us just because we were so far from being ready to do that. I mean, this is all coming in literally in the last few days.
Right.
So maybe Min, Lauren, and I have to kind of go back and think through that, but I would love to get yours and any other sort of input. It seemed, you know, well, I can talk offline about this later, but right, this first piece is really just sort of a preliminary kind of shorter take on stuff, right? But we
Yeah.
will be, the four subcommittees are going to be doing larger presentation later to school committee or what?
Well, I want to talk about that at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
So let's talk offline about how to wrap up this phase. The short answer is I'm not too worried about how to wrap this up again because I don't see this as being a major the external presentation of this deliverables to me is not so important. It's just gonna what's important is the recommendations deliverable because that's going to be the one that's presented. I mean, for people who want to know what happened during this phase, this should be completed and filed, and for people who want to look at it, they should be able to look at it. But to me, it should be organized and available, and people
Yeah.
should be able to understand what happened during this phase. But to me, it's again mostly a resource for the next phase, which is the important public facing phase. What other group? Which was the other group that has not reported out in the inventory phase yet? I
Probably
think that was
mine.
Matthew, right? In the energy group.
Yeah, so good news for us is we were able to have our final data collecting session. We were able to have an interview
Great.
with Charlie.
That's
So
great.
that was amazing. We got a lot of insight from him. He also gave us a data download for all of
Okay, just public
2023.
thanks to anyone listening to Helen for making that happen.
Yeah, that was super key. So right now I am crunching, basically updating all our data. I'll do a quick share based on, essentially we have our report written up. I just now have to update the data based on what Charlie gave us, and I will update our graphs and figures and the like once I figure out where, oh, the share screen. That helps. Yeah, so again, we have our report is essentially a few people have to put in their bios, but we have outline of our processes. We're basically creating a summary table that basically just lists a lot of our findings, whether from an energy perspective, from a fuel usage, and then features that we found in each of the buildings or heard from Charlie. We then go into just a little bit about the actual data. So talking about how energy has changed, gone up or down at each of the individual schools. Again, this helps hotspot, I guess, show the progress that's happened, particularly with the new schools. We go a little bit into the actual emissions and just showing how much emissions are coming from each of the schools and how it splits between natural gas and electricity, understanding that talking with Charlie, and this is not necessarily a town policy, and that's the thing, that's one of the things that findings that he's running into is there's no directive that says, please electrify, please get rid of all emissions. But he's kind of building that roadmap under the scenes and needs a little bit of, hey, the town actually wants to do this, so he can actually, bring forth this type of plan. But it's basically it just shows where those emissions are. So
It's really interesting to know that there's not a town directive that he's operating under.
Right. They have the EUI directive for the new buildings, but that's the only hard policy that exists in the town. So otherwise, he knows this is the direction that people want, but there's nothing that he can point to that says, this is what the town wants to do. I'm going in that direction.
What about the PSB sustainability policy? Is there not sufficient direction in that to mandate to provide a mandate for him regarding PSB buildings? I'm wondering if there's a policy gap that you identified with this.
That's essentially, I think, what we've identified, and that might be
Great.
one of the recommendations to start closing. What are those KPIs he should actually be balancing against cost? And what is the actual future desire? Is it net zero? Is it zero emissions? Is it full electrification? And he can work towards that. And he has a full inventory of all our fossil fuel equipment. He has thoughts on, the general timeline of that it would be replaced and what they'd be replaced with. But obviously that costs money. And he just needs directive. If that's the decision we need to go, then I'll formalize his plan and then we'll post it. But I think that's the gap that he communicated to us that exists right now as he's trying to support this type of program.
That's great because that's so easily remedied.
But doesn't that surprise you? Doesn't that surprise you, Steve? I mean, Brookline has a 2040 deadline for zero fossil fuel emissions.
Yeah, I'm really curious where the space between the PSB sustainability policy and ZAB turned out to be that didn't provide this mandate to Charlie. I believe him that there wasn't one, but it was an inadvertent gap. So it's something that we can, seems like a no-brainer recommendation that we close it via policy. What I'm curious about is whether it's a PSB policy that can close it or whether it's town policy. But either way, I don't see why the school committee can't at the very least coordinate the policy, either on the school side or the town side. Anyway, please go on.
No, perfect. Yeah, we've found out some really neat things they're doing. So they're using artificial intelligence to understand when to turn on some of the equipment in the building. And it basically adapts to what is actually necessary based on temperature outside and use of the building to determine. So that was kind of a really interesting, just, technology usage to optimize and reduce energy usage. So I thought that was neat because I know at Thermo Fisher we're not using that at the moment. So kudos to him. Yeah, so we've basically found those type of things. Again, the general finding was what I mentioned. There was a desire to share more of this data with the community. He tried to update it. I guess there was a sustainability person in the planning department or DPW that used to kind of publish some of this, but that kind of all died with COVID. So I think he wants to, like, how do we share this data? How do we share performance? How do we share all the good things that we're doing with the community? Because I think that he's found that to be a gap of, oh, we're actually doing a lot of great things, but nobody knows about it.
Great. I mean, terrible, but great that's such a easily actionable area for this group.
Exactly. So that's kind of the big things that we got, other than, still got to crunch through the data to see, where are the hot spots, what schools are performing great, which ones are behind, are they already up for, demolition and rebuild anyway, and those type of things. Otherwise, then we have, some great, one of the members kind of provided a good overview of the 2 tours that we did at Pierce and Driscoll, and it was some picture in the commentary. So that's going to essentially be the inventory report for us.
So this is really interesting to me because it sounds like your group actually has more in common with the food and waste group than the other groups, in that the challenge is more about unlocking and hang on a second, kiddo. I'm in the middle of a meeting. It's in the freezer. Sorry about that, everybody. The ice cream is in the freezer. Threw me off. It has more in common with the food and waste group in that it's more about unlocking and removing obstacles from a plan that's already in place and improving communication around that plan, rather than strategizing new ideas or coordinating uncoordinated efforts. Does that sound right?
Sounds about right for us based on what Charlie indicated he kind of has in the works.
Okay, that's great to know. That could be a nice framework for the recommendations at the end too. Maybe he can even provide like an early review of the recommendations, or someone on his team. Any questions for Matthew?
I have a small minor question that I'm almost reluctant to ask. I taught at the old Lincoln School for a couple of years, and I thought they had some like early version of heat pumps that were providing both cooling and heating. Are they only cooling those units that are in a lot of the classrooms? You might not know this, but
We don't know how the specifics of every single school. They were putting heat pumps into some of the classrooms, particularly the old ones, but the central base heating system might
Right.
still be that, natural
Right.
gas board.
yeah, thank you.
Matthew, what does your group need to finalize this phase, do you think?
We just I think it's on me to crunch some numbers, and then Chrissy kind of formalizing that table, and then we're essentially done on the inventory.
Okay, do you anticipate any obstacles to it, or do you feel pretty good about? Okay, so just some
I
time.
do.
Okay. Any further? I think we're good then on inventory presentations, right? So let's So Roger, let's talk offline about the format for the inventory. When they're all complete, please put them in your working group subfolder on Google Drive. And then Betsy, when they're finalized, let's upload them to actually we don't have a place for this. We'll have to figure out a place to file them.
Okay,
So maybe you and I can talk about what would be an appropriate place to put them.
okay, sure.
Okay, so let's talk for the next chunk of this meeting on the next phase recommendations. So this is an open discussion. And the next step will be mine after this discussion to create a template for all the groups to use. But what I want to talk about is what will be the most compelling format for the recommendations phase. The goal of the recommendations phase, I think, is to present your recommendations as clearly and compellingly to decision makers and PSB. So that would be the administration, the school committee, and other influential stakeholders who might advocate for the recommendations you make. So I mean, I think it's a presentation of some kind or multiple presentations, but I want to just open this up to your ideas about what you think would be the most effective way to make your recommendations.
It
Stephen,
seems to me if we just had one, it would be too much for all those people to sit through. I would think a presentation from how many
Oh,
groups?
right. No, I think there should be free. Yeah, go ahead, Dean.
So freestanding separate, because it's just too much. I mean, every single one of these subcommittees has a big charge, right? So I could see quite a few policy recommendations and other kinds of communication recommendations coming out of each group. At least I know there's a lot with waste reduction, healthy foods and all. I don't know.
Okay. I mean, but I think there should be multiple presentations, but I do think there should be, at the very least, one school committee docketed session devoted to, I would like to advocate for one school committee docketed session devoted to the recommendations of the 4 groups. So it should just be the recommendations and a representative of each of the groups making them. Go ahead, Eric.
I am wondering about the longer term life of these recommendations. And I feel like if we make our recommendations, it's going to be super overwhelming. And if I'm a school committee member listening to these recommendations, I'm going to be like, wow, that's a lot that we have to do. How am I going to keep it in my head? And it seems like some of the things we'll be asking for, they're not like, it's not all going to happen at once, and it's a lot to keep in your mind. And I'm wondering how we go about making sure that these recommendations live on even after we kind of make our pitch.
I think that so apart from the report and presentation, I'm very visual, so I need like a kind of a table to see where we are and how we are moving. So for me, it would be very helpful, for example, the recommendations are attached to a timeline and to the procedure. This is a policy, needs to be done. This is attached to some monetary improvements or whatever, that when the school committee go back to the recommendation, they can really translate to a kind of an action plan. Like, oh, okay, I see. These are policies that doesn't cost money. Let's do that. I mean, at the beginning, let's start with that and then move kind of along this table. So there is something like visual that helps you visualize how is this going to be translated in a kind of an action plan and also results. I think it's probably very complicated to attach to kind of what kind of emissions cut or something like that. That would be ideal, but I think that's really, beyond the scope. That's a very complicated calculation. but some kind of a timeline or a result that we would like to see, something like that. I think that would be helpful for the school committee to not feel overwhelmed, as Eric says, like, oh my God, what should I do with all this is now?
Well, a couple of things, just one following Eric and one following Rebecca. So maybe just on Rebecca, what I think I might have heard too is maybe there's sort of a web-based, interactive kind of space where there's like 4 slide decks or something where people can kind of, look at maybe the most accessible of our information and just kind of, just have it be publicly accessible in a way that's easy. But following up on Eric's comment, I mean, we have the sustainability policy, right? That's kind of like driving this thing, but there's no teeth, there's no timeline, there's no enforcement, there's no budget. So part of, I guess maybe we should think about now or later is like, how do we make this actionable? People may be like, wow, that's really interesting. Oh, I'm actually even overwhelmed. Maybe I can't deal with this unless there's like, what has to be in place to make this move forward. And maybe the recommendations are kind of like tiered in some ways so that people feel it's overwhelming. But okay, let's do part 1 of or tier 1 and tier 2 of our food services and waste. That's something we can do now in a I don't know, maybe there's like a timeline or a timetable that goes with some of our recommendations that feels pushing a little bit but also kind of realistic. I don't know, I'm just trying to get my head around like, how do we make this, all million priorities, how do we make this kind of rise to a higher priority?
So it sounds like a table with some attributes, whether it's how the level of effort to implement, theoretically resources cost, although we might not have that, and then complexity. So I guess it's a recommendation. I don't know, do we want to say like the intended outcome or the intended KPI that this will be measured against, so they understand what this links to, and then some of the other attributes? I guess that's really the summary, and then obviously they'll probably want a little bit more detail, but that might be not what gets presented, but the backup, so they can always pull back up to it if they need it.
Yeah, so I definitely think that every recommendation should have an intended outcome and a timeline associated with it. I think the timeline can be pretty loose. I think it could be short, medium, and long term. And I think we also need to have categories of recommendations, like whether it's a policy recommendation, a human resource recommendation, some kind of financial investment recommendation apart from human resources. We can come up with those categories. I hear you also that one big data dump is unlikely to produce change. So, but I also think that there does need to be a culminating presentation, but I think perhaps it could be last. I wonder if there could be subcommittee presentations, for instance, the food and waste group and the education and curriculum group can present, maybe we can present to the curriculum subcommittee, because I think both groups to me reasonably fall within within that ambit. And the energy and the energy can present to capital. What am I leaving out, Dean? Transportation, and transportation also to capital, I would think. But then so that's one, but then there's non-school committee related audiences. And I mean, for transportation, that's obvious. There's a bunch of them out there. I wonder if first we present to subcommittees and civil society groups to build more niche interest in the topics, and then we build to a docketed school committee conversation, and we invite a lot of the groups there to public comment as well, so that they are able to comment intelligently, informedly on the substance of the presentation, something like that. So that people don't encounter that maybe they've encountered pieces of it that they're interested in previously, if not the entire thing. But I do think that they should that there should be a presentation that's the kind of a capstone presentation where the high level recommendations are heard in full. And the entire school committee has an opportunity to ask questions of all the subgroup coordinators.
I mean, we have like, what, 8-10 weeks left of this school year, something like that. Part of me feels like we should not be doing too much of this over the summer because, people won't be around. And I hate to sort of go too far out, but I'm just wondering, like, maybe there's a series of 4 nights, in like September, October, or something like that. And
I think so too. I think there's also a lot more energy at the beginning of the school year than at the end of the school year. I think there's just like my recollection from like May school committee meetings is that they're usually like exhausted. And whereas the fall ones, there's just like everyone's bright and eager again. I think it would make sense to do it in the fall. And I still also want to get us all together to do some of the recommendations work in person.
yeah. So maybe that happens like late in the school year. I mean, we potentially could try to do something in the summer, but that's just hard because everyone's,
That seems really unlikely to me.
but like maybe in late May or early June, we have, a little bit of that. So we're kind of syncing up a little bit.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Maybe that's when we do some subcommittee presentations, or maybe I can advocate for that. And then we maybe do something in full at the beginning of the school year. How does that
But
sound to
yours-
people?
You and someone else was saying like, we're looking for a sort of a bigger audience. So is that a school committee meeting that's in the school committee room, or is that, a school committee sponsored event? I don't know. Maybe that doesn't have to be decided right now, but
I don't see why it can't be both. And I don't see why it has to be school committee sponsored. I don't see why we can't, I guess because we are part of the school committee. But I don't see why this group can't docket a public meeting as an event as well, saying like this is a public in-person meeting where we invite you to hear recommendations and we're inviting the public to a more interactive discussion of the results of this at the high school, for instance, or something like that.
I mean, also like if we want to really put some pressure on moving this forward, having the public, there in a larger presence, could be-
Yeah.
I know for at least, I mean, very specifically, the waste reduction part, right, of what we're going to be recommending probably. I can think of some affinity groups that might, be interested in coming to a presentation. I mean, we've had, 4 years of the zero waste Mothers Out Front
Right.
people, volunteers working at Brookline High School, trying to get everybody to do composting. We have SWAC, Solid Waste Advisory Committee, right, that I'm on, and certainly John Dempsey and others. We've worked on waste reduction town-wide. Would probably be interested in knowing what the schools are presenting. We have a full zero waste group as part of Mothers Out Front that's bigger than just the volunteers. Anyway, so there are some affinity groups that might be interested in that. I
Yeah,
don't know.
I agree
some of
with
the
you.
other-
Like David Perlman, the school committee chair, likes to say to me that he gets asked about this group all the time from all kinds of people. And there's just a lot of enthusiasm about what is happening here, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of community interest in this topic.
About all of this, everybody, all these sustainability groups?
About what's
good.
happening with the climate sustainability group and
Excellent.
when are we going to hear about the results. So I wouldn't be surprised if we were able to mobilize community interest around the recommendations. I don't think I'm just being hopeful. I think that's legitimate engagement that we could get from the community.
Yeah, timing's important. Town meeting is coming up. I forget when is it in May? And then you have many of your big wigs are busy for night after night after night.
Yeah, that's true. So
Work,
hmm,
yeah.
Betsy, maybe another thing that you and I can do is we could start looking at calendars to start to plan out. Well, I guess I'll have to talk to whoever the incoming chair would be too about docketing this, because there's going to be turnover in the school committee after the elections in May.
Mhm.
David will be leaving the school committee, and there'll be a new chair. So I guess those conversations will have to happen with whoever are the new officers. All right, so that'll be TBD on the dates. But I think the schedule of having some subcommittee meeting, trying to docket this in subcommittees in the spring and having a bigger meeting or having bigger meetings in the fall, that seems like a good plan to me. But back to the format, how else do you think this can be made? I have to say, when you were talking about it just now, I was fantasizing about like finding college interns to make some animated presentation and having it live on a website that someone's volunteering to create, but I don't know those kinds of people. What other ways do you think that this could be made most compellingly to various audiences?
Well, pictures tell 1,000 words. We got to get pictures somehow or other. I don't know how, but we need pictures.
I mean, do any of you know people who can help volunteer to make a more multimedia presentation? By any chance?
I mean,
Well,
big. Is there in high school class that they collaborate with the Brookline Interactive Group?
Yeah, Eric, does your group have people who have those kinds of skills who would be interested in doing stuff like that?
I don't know that maybe. I mean, I don't think they would be. I don't know anybody who would be great at it. Roger, do you know anybody who would be really great at it?
Well, this might be a huge, request, but there's a woman who I had mentioned way long ago who wants to help put my, the data from these surveys into slides. And she did, like Stephen, maybe some of the others saw some of the slides from 2 years ago. They look, I mean, she's really good. I don't know how much work this is, but she's Brookline community member, and I think may still have kids in the schools. She's really good with data and presenting stuff. So maybe, I mean, right now I'm trying to get her to help me with just these slides right now, to have at least a few of them for next week's thing. And it's like a quick turnaround, so it's kind of asking a lot. But this would not be till much later, right?
Right. This would be
So,
for the fall. I mean, if we want to start just poking around our personal networks to see if anyone has the interest in volunteering to help with
Yeah.
the visualization of recommendations, I think that would be great.
Yeah,
And that we
one
don't
thing
have any reason
Matthew-
we don't have any policy against it.
Yeah, I think Matthew had said it maybe, but thinking about like what are all the I'm just looking at my notes, like the sort of who's sort of relevant for taking action. Is it a policy? Is it human resource? Think of some of those like categories that you said you would think through, Stephen. Maybe each one has kind of like a little icon, that we
Right,
have like a timetable going across,
right.
something like this, kind of simplify it like that.
Well, so for now, I think we should, at the very least, prepare two just basic decks. One would be a subgroup deck, and then one that we compile out of those subgroup decks to be the main one that we could try to make really compelling. But I think we should just focus on the subgroup one where we come up with what's the context for this, what's the lay of the land, and then what's the recommendations based on that, and sketching out those recommendations in terms of their category, what kind of recommendation they are, what's the timeline for it, and what's the outcome of that recommendation. How's it really going to benefit Brookline? And then we'll try to create a master presentation out of that shows the big picture. How's this really going to make Brookline the kind of district that really prepares youth
Yeah.
for a different climate future?
Stephen, maybe that's maybe thinking too far out, but is there plans to follow up with these recommendations? Let's say this group make the recommendations to school committees start doing whatever implementation. Are we going to meet again to follow up on those things? No.
No,
Okay.
the end of the mandate for this group is to make the recommendations.
Okay, because I
That's
think
why
that
we
would be
have-
also important, like the follow-up of what we have recommended, the results, what we see, the progress, and so that it doesn't just die. Okay.
No,
However, Steve, I bet, we've thought about it in our group. There may be a recommendation that comes out of this, that there is an advisory board,
sure,
right? That is going to follow up on this annually or semi-annually and
Sure.
follow along with the progress.
if a recommendation is that there be some kind of accountability mechanism in the form of an advisory group, a volunteer advisory team that meets quarterly to request results or something like that. The only thing is the school committee didn't sign on to a commitment when it mandated the existence of this group. It signed on to an advisory body to come up with recommendations that they could or could not accept. So we just have to make sure that, I don't know if there's an accountability mechanism, but maybe more of a support mechanism to identify and further encourage ways of adopting the recommendations or something like that.
It needs teeth. I mean, we can go beyond what the school committee has given approval for. I think that's the recommendation we're going to have to make. If there's no teeth in this, if nobody's going to look at this, forget it.
I mean, I think if we make, I guess my position is there is appetite for recommendations that help kids, help Brookline youth really meet the challenges they face. And that to me is the context of this whole group's work, So it, that's how I see it. I know in this budget climate, like everything seems like non-core, like anything that's not related to a very narrow band of services is hard to justify. But this feels really core to me, and that's how I want to present it. So that's how I see the recommendations. I don't know if that's helpful to hear, but that's how I see it.
It seems to me that if we have a kind of table, as Rebecca was saying, or a timeline, and we frame them as goals, or I don't know, I'm not sure what the language is, goals or expectations or whatever, then, I mean, if you frame them as goals, then you can then, organize, or other people can organize political pressure on school committee over the coming months and years, and say, you are not meeting the goals that your own committee set, meet them.
Recommended, yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. If this group turns into a pressure group that's terrific. I'm all for it.
We set the goals and then other people pressure,
Or you guys, I mean,
or we do too, but
yeah. Okay, we have another minute left in this meeting. Any final thoughts or questions or any other business to bring up? Dean?
So you're going to give us parameters pretty
Yeah.
quickly, because our group has moved on to recommendations, policy recommendations, and our group people are dividing up and taking certain ones to get more information about, but we want to know what the parameters are in the final
Yes.
report.
So I'm going to give you a template for a deck to prepare your recommendations. And what was that gesture?
Yeah. I need a timeline, like when, like
Let me do it next week. I'll have it by the end of next week.
the end of next week. All right. We got another meeting coming up. Good.
Okay. And then let me also try to set a date for an in-person meeting. Let's shoot for May for that. And then let me also, third action item for me is let me also see about getting us docketed in subcommittee meetings for a preliminary share out of some of our recommendations. So I guess we should meet in person before that. So let me work on dates for both of those things. So I have got the next 3 action items. Great to see everyone. Thank you for all your
Thank
hard
you.
work in this phase.
Take care, everybody.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Steve.